She's just a low IQ individual. Donald Trump spat those words across the chamber, certain they would bury Jasmine Crockett. But instead, they ignited the most explosive confrontation Congress had seen in decades. In a country where over 74 million Americans once cast their vote for Trump, and where 1 in 3 households still cling to his name, Jasmine chose to stand, alone, fearless, armed with truth. Within minutes, her defiance would pull in millions of live viewers, fracture the chamber, and drag Trump's carefully built legacy into the spotlight. This was not insult and reply. This was the beginning of a political war, truth against power, justice against fear. And the battlefield was the United States Congress, live before the nation. The cameras swept across the chamber, capturing every twitch, every whisper, every heartbeat of anticipation. Millions watched from their homes, screens glowing in kitchens, living rooms, and bars across the country. Anchors held their breath. Reporters scribbled furiously. Everyone knew tonight would be volatile, but no one knew how soon the explosion would come. Then it happened. Jasmine Crockett rose. Her hands clutched a thick file, its spine scarred by stamps of classification and secrecy. With a single movement, she raised it high, then slammed it down on the desk with a crack that echoed like thunder. The chamber froze. Gasps rippled through the air. Heads turned, and the gavel pounded in confusion. The sound lingered, not just in the ears of those present, but across the nation, carried through television speakers into millions of living rooms. And then her voice, sharp as a blade, cut the silence in two. "You lied to this nation!" The words ricocheted off marble walls, louder than any gavel, stronger than any cheer. The chamber erupted. Some lawmakers leapt to their feet, shouting in shock. Others recoiled, stunned by the audacity. The press gallery exploded into frantic scribbles and camera flashes. Phones buzzed in every corner of the room as aides texted feverishly, "Did you hear what she just said?" And the cameras, hungry for the face of power, swung instantly toward Donald Trump. He sat rigid at the podium, eyes wide, his lips parted as though the air itself had betrayed him. His skin drained of color, beads of sweat glistening under the harsh lights. For a man who built his myth on invincibility, the image was devastating. Pale, shaken, human. Across the country, millions saw it live. Networks replayed it instantly, magnifying his expression, frame by frame, as analysts whispered in disbelief, "This is the first time we've seen him rattled." Inside the chamber, chaos boiled over. Trump's allies roared in anger, fists pounding desks, voices clashing in desperate defense. "Out of order! She can't say that! Strike it from the record!" But the words were already immortal. They had been spoken, heard, recorded, broadcast. Nothing could erase them now. Jasmine stood tall, her eyes locked on Trump, her chest rising with the steadiness of conviction. She did not flinch at the fury around her. She did not waver under the storm. She simply waited, gaze burning, daring him to answer. Trump's hand shot to the podium, gripping the edges so tight his knuckles whitened. His voice cracked as he barked, "Lies, radical lies! This woman is nothing but a disgrace." But the tone betrayed him. It wasn't the voice of dominance anymore. It was the voice of a man fighting to breathe, in waters rising around him. The chamber roared again, split into 2 wars within the same walls. His loyalists screamed in support, chanting his name like a shield against truth. Opponents jeered back, their voices overlapping in a chaos so loud it seemed the marble itself shook. And through it all, Jasmine remained still. Her silence was thunder. Her presence was defiance. Her words, only moments old, were already history. She leaned forward, her voice steady, calm, unyielding. The people of this country deserve the truth, and tonight they will hear it. The gavel slammed, the speaker shouting for order. But order was gone. This was no longer a chamber of procedure. It was a battlefield. Outside, the nation convulsed. On social media, clips of her shout went viral within seconds. The line exploded into a hashtag, "Shekhi, you lied to this nation." Within minutes, it dominated every platform, repeated by millions, turned into chants at protests, painted on signs. woven into memes and headlines alike. News anchors' voices trembled with urgency. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett just accused the president of lying to the American people. Live. This is unprecedented. We have never seen a direct confrontation like this on the floor. And still the cameras lingered on Trump's face. Ashen, wet with sweat, jaw tight, eyes darting. For decades he had commanded the narrative, controlled the room, bent reality to his will. But tonight a single voice had pierced his armor. And that voice was Jasmine Crockett's. The chamber's noise swelled again. Screams, cheers, chants, chaos. But beneath it all lay something deeper, something heavier. A shift. For the first time, the nation saw not just a president. They saw a man cornered, shaken, exposed. And they saw the woman who had cornered him. Jasmine Crockett stood there unflinching, the file before her glowing under the lights like a weapon unsheathed. The war had begun with a slam of paper and 4 words, and it would not end until one of them was destroyed. Donald Trump shot up from his seat like a man struck by lightning. His face burned red, veins bulging at his neck, sweat glistening under the lights. The air seemed to thicken as he gripped the podium, leaning forward, his voice erupting into a roar. She's just a low IQ individual, a disgrace to this nation. The words cracked through the chamber like gunfire. The insult was sharp, venomous, designed not merely to wound Jasmine Crockett, but to erase her, to strip her of legitimacy in front of the world. And his loyalists answered. They surged to their feet, fists hammering desks, voices colliding into a deafening chant. The sound thundered through the chamber, a wall of noise pressing down like a suffocating weight. Disgrace! 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 The press gallery shook with the frenzy. Cameras snapped furiously, capturing Trump's snarl, the spit at the corners of his lips, the trembling fury of a man who had ruled with insults for decades. But Jasmine did not move. She stood still, her posture tall, her eyes locked on him like fire on dry wood. Every insult hurled at her seemed to dissolve against that gaze. Every jeer from his side of the chamber only sharpened the silence she held. Trump slammed his fist against the podium, the sound reverberating like a drum of war. "You don't belong here. You should be ashamed to even stand in this chamber." His supporters roared louder, their voices rising into a suffocating wave, the marble walls trembling with the vibration of hate. But Jasmine's stillness was louder than their thunder. For the camera lenses, for the millions watching live, the contrast was electric. A raging president, his face twisted with fury, and a silent congresswoman, her eyes burning, her body unshaken. Commentators whispered breathlessly into microphones. "He's unraveling. Look at him, red, sweating, screaming. And look at her. She hasn't moved an inch." Trump jabbed a finger toward Jasmine, spittle flying with every word. "She's a liar. She's fake. She's worthless. Nothing but noise." His voice cracked on the last word, straining under the weight of his own fury. The chamber roared in approval from his side, but it was no longer unanimous. On the opposite benches, Democrats sat straighter, some smirking, some shaking their heads. Even a few independents began to murmur uneasily, the spectacle of the president's rage cracking the image of control he so desperately tried to project. And Jasmine, her lips curved into the faintest smile, not mocking, not cruel, but certain. She let the noise thunder, let the insults rain down, let the storm rage. And then, calmly, deliberately, she raised her head and locked her gaze with his. For a moment, time stilled. The roar around them dulled, as though the chamber itself bent to the gravity of that silent exchange. Trump faltered. It was only a flicker, a brief pause in his tirade, but it was there. The image of a man who realized in that instant that his insults were striking air, not flesh. The networks replayed it instantly, the cameras zooming in on his eyes, wide, frantic, searching for a reaction that never came. And across the nation, millions of viewers leaned forward, feeling the shift. This wasn't the dominance they had grown used to. This was a man throwing fire into a storm and watching it die in the wind. Trump roared again, desperate to recover. "You are nothing, Jasmine Crockett, nothing." But the words meant to crush only rang hollow. because the image told a different story. One of fury against composure, one of arrogance against quiet fire. And then Jasmine moved, just one step forward, slow and deliberate, her heels striking the floor like a countdown. The sound pierced through the roar, a rhythm stronger than the chants. She leaned slightly toward the microphone, her voice calm, measured, slicing through the storm like steel. The louder a man screams, the more he fears being heard. The chamber gasped. The insults stopped mid-chant. The jeers faltered. Even Trump himself froze, his jaw tightening, his breath caught in his throat. The words echoed heavy, undeniable, cutting deeper than any insult he had thrown. Reporters scrambled to tweet. Anchors whispered on live broadcasts. She just turned it on him. That was a dagger. Outside, social media ignited. Low IQ individual collided with the louder he screams, exploding across platforms. Clips of Jasmine's line flooded feeds, replayed millions of times within minutes. Trump's hand trembled on the podium. He tried to speak, but his lips quivered, his voice trapped behind clenched teeth. Jasmine remained still, her eyes unblinking, her fire unwavering. She had absorbed the storm, and in a single line, she had sent it crashing back upon him. The chamber knew it. The nation knew it. Trump himself knew it. This was no longer his game. The insults that once dominated rooms, silenced opponents, bent narratives, were useless against her. And Jasmine Crockett stood taller than ever, her silence sharper than his rage, her words heavier than his insults. The war was only beginning, and already he was bleeding. Jasmine Crockett lowered her gaze to the thick folder resting on her desk, her hand hovering over it like a blade waiting to be drawn. The chamber still throbbed with the echoes of Trump's rage, the walls heavy with the weight of his insults. Yet amid the chaos, her silence cut sharper than any shout. And then she moved. Her fingers slipped across the edge of the file, pulling free a single sheet stamped with the weight of government authority. She held it up, her expression unreadable, her voice carrying with the clarity of a judge delivering sentence. Mr. President, if you had no knowledge of the transfers, then why does your signature appear here? The room cracked with the force of her words. Gasps swept the chamber. Pens froze mid-scribble. The gavel hung in midair. For one electrifying moment, every eye turned to Trump. Waiting. He faltered. It was subtle, just the briefest fracture. His eyes widened. His lips parted as though the air had betrayed him. His hand twitched against the podium, as if reaching for a weapon he didn't have. And millions watching at home saw it. For the first time, Donald Trump looked unsure. The networks replayed it instantly, frame by frame, zooming into his hesitation. Commentators whispered in awe. That's the pause, that's the crack. Jasmine didn't blink. She pressed harder, her voice calm but merciless. You swore under oath that you were never involved. Yet this record, this page, carries your name, your signature, your authority. How do you explain this contradiction? She laid the sheet flat on the desk, sliding it forward so the cameras could capture every inked line. The bold scrawl of his name glared back at him, undeniable. Trump's jaw tightened, his chest heaved. His fingers dug into the podium as though it could hold him upright. Then he snapped. Fake! Forgery! Radical fraud! He bellowed, slamming his fist against the wood. His voice rose into a shriek. This is all manufactured. She's lying. She's a liar. The chamber erupted again, his allies pounding desks, their chants exploding into a deafening roar. Fraud! 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 But the sound could not erase the image. The image of a man caught in the crosshairs of truth. The image of hesitation, played and replayed on every screen in America. And the people outside the chamber felt it. On social media, clips of the moment spread like wildfire. Hashtags surged within seconds. The pause, the signature, Trump caught. Memes captured his frozen expression, the hesitation etched across his face, turning it into a symbol of fear. In living rooms across the country, voices murmured the same thought. He's rattled. He's afraid. For once, he's not in control. Jasmine leaned closer to the microphone, her tone colder than steel. The truth doesn't tremble, Mr. President, but you do. The chamber gasped again. the words slicing through the chants, silencing even some of his supporters. The speaker's gavel hammered furiously, but order was a dream slipping further out of reach. Trump's face flushed crimson, his nostrils flaring, his body trembling with the fury of a man exposed. "You dare accuse me? You, a nothing, a nobody? You think you can lecture the President of the United States?" But his shouts only betrayed his weakness, because he hadn't answered her question. He hadn't explained the signature. He hadn't explained the contradiction. And the silence of his answer screamed louder than any insult he hurled. Reporters typed frantically, headlines already flashing across networks. Crockett confronts Trump with his own signature. Trump dodges deadly question on live TV. The tide was shifting, not in whispers, not in shadows, but live before the eyes of millions. Jasmine folded her hands calmly, her expression unshaken, her fire unbroken. She had drawn blood with a single question, and she knew it. Trump gripped the podium tighter, his knuckles white, his breathing shallow. He glanced desperately at his lawyers, at his allies, at anyone who could rescue him from the noose tightening around his words. But there was no rescue, not from this. And Jasmine Crockett stood taller than ever, her presence filling the chamber, her gaze locked on him like a predator cornering prey. The deadly question had been asked. The evidence had been laid bare. And the hesitation, the crack in his armor, had been seen by the world. For decades, Trump had turned insults into shields, anger into weapons, fear into armor. But none of it could withstand a single page of truth. The people watching knew it. The chamber knew it. And deep down, so did he. The war was no longer one of noise and bravado. It had become a war of evidence, of silence, of cracks spreading across the empire of lies. And Jasmine Crockett had just delivered the first lethal strike. But the chamber hadn't seen anything yet. It began as a flicker on the massive LED screens mounted above the dais. A murmur rippled through the crowd as static filled the silence, breaking into distorted sound. Lawmakers turned their heads upward, squinting, confused. Reporters craned their necks, pens frozen above notebooks. Then the voice came through. Trump's voice, clear, sharp, unmistakable. "Of course I knew. I signed off myself. No one else had the guts to do it." The words echoed across the chamber, blasting through speakers, played for the entire world to hear. The reaction was instantaneous. Gasps erupted like cannon fire. Some lawmakers covered their mouths, others shot to their feet in shock. The press gallery exploded. Cameras flashing, journalists yelling into phones, anchors narrating live as chaos unfolded before their eyes. And Donald Trump froze, his face drained of color, jaw slack, eyes darting frantically around the chamber. Then, as the recording played again, looping for all to hear, his body snapped back into rage. "Turn it off! Turn it off! Fake! Fake!" he screamed, slamming his fist against the podium so hard the microphone shook. His voice cracked with fury, shrill and desperate. But the screen did not obey. The recording repeated once more, Trump's own voice betraying him. "Of course I knew. I signed off myself. No one else had the guts to do it." Every repetition was a hammer blow, striking his defenses, shattering his narrative. The chamber erupted into pandemonium. Republicans leapt from their seats, shouting for order, screaming, "This is illegal! Who played that?" While Democrats erupted in shouts of triumph, some pounding their desks in approval. The speaker's gavel slammed again and again, useless against the storm. And Jasmine? She stood silent, her eyes fixed on him, unblinking, relentless. She hadn't pressed play. She hadn't lifted a finger. But the truth had arrived anyway, crashing down like a tidal wave. The mystery of who leaked it only deepened the chaos. Aides scrambled through hallways, whispering frantically into phones. Reporters speculated live. Someone inside must have released this. This is unprecedented. Evidence like this doesn't just appear. It was timed. It was deliberate. Outside, the country erupted. Cable networks cut into programming, broadcasting the clip in real time. Social media detonated, hashtags multiplying by the second. The tape. He knew. Trump exposed. Within minutes, tens of millions had seen it, heard it, shared it. And for the first time, America wasn't asking if he lied. They were asking how much. Trump's screams grew louder, more frantic. His face turned crimson, sweat dripping down his temples. His tie crooked from his thrashing. "It's fake! AI! Fabricated! This is a witch hunt! I never said it!" But the voice on the recording was unmistakable. The cadence, the inflection, the bravado, it was him. Every syllable was a mirror he could not escape. Jasmine finally leaned forward, her voice cutting through the uproar with chilling calm. "So which is it, Mr. President? Were you lying then, or are you lying now?" The chamber exploded again. Cheers from one side, jeers from the other. The question sliced deeper than the recording itself, trapping him in a no-win corner. Because whichever answer he chose, the truth was poison. He staggered at the podium, his mouth opening and closing with no words to fill the air. The camera zoomed in, capturing every twitch of his lips, every bead of sweat sliding down his cheek. The image was damning, replayed instantly across networks, framed with captions, caught by his own voice. Trump denies, but tape speaks. And outside, ordinary people, farmers, veterans, teachers, parents, watched in silence, feeling a shift. This wasn't partisan theater anymore. This was exposure. A president undone by his own words. The chamber itself seemed to tremble under the weight of revelation. The chants, the shouts, the pounding fists, it all blurred into the background against the single, undeniable fact. Donald Trump had contradicted himself, live, on record, on screen. And Jasmine Crockett stood in the eye of the storm, unmoving, her fire unquenched. She hadn't needed to raise her voice. She hadn't needed to hurl insults. She had simply let the truth speak. And the truth was louder than anything Donald Trump could scream. The gavel pounded again, calling for order that would never return. The chamber was no longer a place of procedure. It was an arena of revelation, and the nation was its audience. Trump slumped forward, gripping the podium as though it alone held him upright. His rage had burned into desperation, his voice into cracks of denial. But the damage was done. The leak had surfaced. The tape had played, and no force on earth could rewind what millions had already seen. But Donald Trump was not a man who surrendered. He straightened his tie with shaking fingers, slammed both palms on the podium, and launched into his oldest weapon, the personal attack. "Pathetic! Weak! A total fraud!" he shouted, his words laced with venom. "This woman is nothing. Nothing. She's only here because the media props her up. Low IQ, low class, a total disgrace to Congress." His voice boomed, desperate and wild, each insult hurled like a stone meant to break her. His supporters roared approval, clapping, pounding desks, chanting his words back like a chorus of loyal soldiers. The noise was deafening. It rolled through the chamber in crushing waves designed to drown her, to suffocate her into silence. But Jasmine Crockett only smiled. Not the smile of mockery, not the smile of cruelty, but the steady, unshaken smile of someone who knew the storm could not touch her. She waited. She let him rage, let him burn through his arsenal of names, slurs, and lies. And when the roar reached its peak, she leaned forward, her voice clear and sharp, slicing through the chamber like a scalpel. "If I am nothing, Mr. President, why do you look so afraid of me?" The silence was instantaneous. It fell over the room like a curtain, cutting through chants and jeers, leaving only the echo of her words. Trump froze mid-gesture, his fingers still stabbing the air, his mouth half open. The camera zoomed in, capturing his stammer, his pause, his chest heaving under the weight of her question. And Jasmine pressed further. "You've called me every name you can think of, but not once have you answered the evidence?" The chamber gasped, the reporters scribbling furiously, the speaker hammering the gavel to no avail. Her words carried like thunder, undeniable in their precision. Trump's face twisted, his jaw clenched, his body trembling with rage. "She's a liar, a liar. Everything she says is fake news, total fake news." But Jasmine's eyes glowed with fire. She tilted her head, her tone calm, almost surgical. If the truth were fake, you wouldn't need to scream. The chamber erupted. Cheers from her side, even gasps from his. Reporters tweeted the line within seconds, their feeds exploding with reactions. And outside, the internet lit up. Crockett strikes. Within minutes, it was trending across every platform. Millions shared clips of Jasmine's razor-sharp retorts, pairing them with Trump's red-faced, sputtering denials. Memes spread like wildfire. Trump raging, Jasmine smiling, the caption, "If I am nothing, why are you afraid?" For the first time, the war had left the chamber and entered the bloodstream of the nation. Inside, Trump's attacks only grew more desperate. "You're corrupt, bought and paid for. You hate America. You're trying to destroy me because you can't beat me." Each word landed weaker than the last, each insult bouncing off her like dull arrows against steel. Jasmine leaned back, folding her arms, letting the silence stretch before she spoke again. "I don't need to destroy you, Mr. President. The truth is doing that already." The chamber erupted once more. Applause thundered from her allies while Trump's supporters shouted until their voices cracked. But the balance was shifting, visibly, audibly. The louder he grew, the smaller he seemed. Trump slammed his hand on the podium again, his voice breaking with strain. "She's a witch, a radical leftist witch hunt. This is all theater." But the more he raged, the calmer she became. Her composure was unbearable, infuriating, inescapable. Every camera angle, every split screen told the story the world could see. Rage versus reason, fear versus fire. And Jasmine Crockett never blinked. She leaned into the microphone one last time, her voice steady, her words deliberate, her eyes locked on his. "Call me what you want, insult me all night, but America doesn't need my name. They need your answer, and you have none." The chamber shook with the weight of her words. Reporters scrambled, anchors cut in live. "She's winning the psychological war. This is devastating." Trump's hands shook as he wiped sweat from his brow. His chest rose and fell in shallow bursts, his fury consuming him as the nation watched the unthinkable unfold. Donald Trump, the man who had once crushed opponents with insults, being dismantled word by word, silence by silence. And Jasmine Crockett stood unshaken, her fire undimmed, her presence unbroken. The tape had exposed his lies. Her words had stripped away his armor. And now the nation saw it clearly. Donald Trump was unraveling. The psychological war was his battlefield, and Jasmine Crockett had just claimed it. But she wasn't finished. She let the silence linger, heavy as stone, before leaning toward the microphone again. Her voice dropped into a cold, deliberate calm that cut through the chamber like a blade. "Shall we talk about Don Jr.?" The words detonated like a bomb. Gasps ripped through the chamber. Lawmakers froze mid-breath. Reporters in the gallery leapt to their feet, pens and cameras scrambling to catch every syllable. The noise of the chamber collapsed into a stunned hush, the weight of those 5 words pressing down like thunderclouds before a storm. Trump's face drained, then flushed crimson. His chest heaved as though the air had betrayed him. "No! Don't you dare!" "Fury!" he roared, slamming his fist against the desk so violently the microphone screeched with feedback. But Jasmine did not flinch. She lifted another folder, its pages sealed with evidence that had never seen daylight. Slowly, deliberately, she laid it flat on the desk before her. "Because the truth, Mr. President," she continued, her voice unshaken, "is that Donald Trump Jr. is not your biological son." The chamber erupted. The noise was deafening. Gasps, shouts, the frantic pounding of desks. Some lawmakers clutched their heads, others shouted for order, while the press gallery nearly collapsed into chaos. Journalists screamed into their phones, anchors cut live across networks, their voices breaking as they repeated the unthinkable. Jasmine Crockett just accused Trump of a secret that could shatter his dynasty. Trump's body jolted forward, both hands gripping the podium as though he could rip it from the floor. "Lies, all lies," he bellowed, his voice raw with rage. "How dare you say that? Turn her mic off. This is disgusting." His voice cracked, shrill, desperate. But Jasmine stood her ground, her eyes locked on him, her fire unblinking. She slid the folder closer to the cameras, her hand steady. The documents speak for themselves. The birth records, the medical confirmations, the suppressed files your lawyers buried. The screens lit up instantly, the LED wall glowing with scanned records, highlighted lines, names and signatures impossible to deny. The evidence flooded across the chamber, broadcast to millions watching live. Trump staggered back, his knees buckling slightly, his hand gripping the podium for balance. His face twisted into fury, but his eyes betrayed fear. "Fake! Forgery! This is an outrage!" he shrieked, spittle flying, his tie swinging as he slammed the desk again and again. "He's my son! He's my blood! This is a smear campaign!" But his voice, once booming with dominance, now cracked like glass under weight. The chamber had turned. Lawmakers who once cheered him now whispered to each other in disbelief. Some sat frozen, their faces pale, as though they too had just glimpsed the unraveling of an empire. And Jasmine struck again. "For decades, you built a legacy on family. You branded your name as dynasty, as power, as inheritance. But the truth strips away your mask, and it terrifies you." Her words carved through the uproar, piercing the air, undeniable. The cameras split-screen the two. Trump, wild-eyed and trembling, screaming denials, and Jasmine Crockett, still and composed, her fire unbroken, her voice carrying the weight of judgment. Outside, the country erupted. Social media convulsed with shock, hashtags detonating in real time. His dynasty shattered. Not his son, Crockett exposes. Commentators went live, their voices trembling as they narrated the collapse. This is not just political. This is personal. This goes to the heart of his power, his family, his myth. Inside, the chamber was pandemonium. Allies rushed to his side, whispering frantically, trying to calm him. But Trump shoved them away, his body shaking with fury. "No one believes this! No one!" he screamed, though the world had already heard. Because it wasn't just the accusation. It was the reaction. The red face, the trembling hands, the cracking voice. Each second was broadcast, recorded, replayed. And every replay told the same story, a man undone. Jasmine leaned in again, her tone sharper, colder. "The louder you scream, the clearer the truth becomes." Her words sliced through the chaos, silencing even her own allies for a breathless moment. The chamber held still, the nation suspended in the gravity of her voice. And Trump, once the man who silenced rooms with his presence, was now a man drowning in his own denials. The cameras captured it all, the sweat rolling down his temples, the pounding fist against wood, the trembling of a dynasty cracked open for all to see. And Jasmine Crockett stood unshaken, her fire burning brighter with every second. The strike had landed, not on policy, not on politics, but on the very heart of his empire, his family, and the world knew it. The chamber quaked under the weight of revelation. Trump's fists slammed the podium, his voice breaking into shrieks of denial. His face, crimson and drenched in sweat, betrayed the panic clawing at his chest. And Jasmine Crockett had seen enough. She leaned forward, her eyes blazing with a fire that no insult could extinguish. Her voice rose, not as a question, not as a rebuttal, but as thunder crashing through marble and history itself. "Quit your BS!" The words detonated like a cannon blast, echoing against the high ceilings, reverberating down the hallways, shaking the chamber to its foundations. For a heartbeat, silence. And then, an explosion. Lawmakers shot to their feet, the chamber erupting in applause and cheers so deafening the speaker's gavel was swallowed whole. Even those who had stayed silent until now rose, their hands clapping, their voices booming. The sound rolled like a tidal wave, unrelenting, undeniable. It was not just applause. It was release. It was fury, vindication, catharsis. Trump's eyes widened, his body trembling as he spun from side to side, searching desperately for allies in the roar. His lips moved, but no sound emerged. His voice, his greatest weapon, was gone. Because no insult could match her words. No spin could survive their simplicity. No empire could withstand the truth delivered in 4 unshakable syllables. "Quit Your BS. The cameras caught it all. Split screens beamed the moment to millions watching live. Jasmine standing tall, her fist clenched, her voice still echoing in memory, while Trump clung to the podium like a drowning man. Outside, America erupted. Hashtags lit up the digital sky. New should quit your BS. Yours Crockett Thunder. Yours Truth V's Power. Clips of the moment surged across social media, shared millions of times in mere minutes. Talk shows cut in live. Anchors shaking their heads, their voices breathless. This was history. This was a strike straight to the core of Trump's myth. In diners, in union halls, in suburban living rooms, people rose to their feet, clapping along with the chamber, their voices chanting with hers. The nation itself seemed to stand behind her. Inside the chamber, Trump's fury boiled into desperation. "Shut up! Sit down! You have no right!" he roared, spittle flying, his tie crooked, his hands gripping the podium so tightly his knuckles blanched. But his words were drowned beneath the thunder of applause. Jasmine's allies pounded their desks, their voices joining the chorus. Even independents and skeptics, long wary of choosing a side, stood tall and clapped, compelled by the force of what they had witnessed. Trump's eyes darted, his body trembling. The red flush on his cheeks deepened, creeping up his temples. His lips quivered, searching for another insult, another weapon, but every attempt withered before it could reach his tongue. Because the room no longer belonged to him, it belonged to her. Jasmine Crockett stood like a pillar of fire, her voice still humming through the marble, her words etched into the consciousness of all who heard them. She hadn't just silenced him. She had branded him, marked him, stripped away his armor with a phrase so simple, so brutal, so true it could never be erased. And Trump knew it. He clung to the podium, shaking, his chest heaving, his jaw slack. He opened his mouth once more, but only a strangled sound escaped. The man who had once bent entire chambers to his will now stood mute before the storm, and Jasmine Crockett, smiling, unshaken, watched him crumble. The chamber's applause swelled again, louder, stronger, rolling like thunder across the nation. The sound was no longer applause. It was allegiance. It was testimony. It was history. Every clap said it. Every cheer screamed it. Every chant carried it. Trump was no longer in command. The phrase had broken him, shattering his myth, exposing his fear, reducing his empire to a hollow shell trembling in front of the world. And Jasmine Crockett had done it with 4 words. "Quit your bullshit." The chamber thundered with applause, but it didn't last unchallenged. Trump's loyalists exploded from their seats, red-faced, fists pounding on their desks. "Out of order," they shouted. "Remove her! Expel her from this session!" Their voices rose in a shrill chorus, a desperate attempt to reclaim control, to smother her flame with procedure and punishment. The speaker's gavel cracked against wood, but it was useless against the chaos. One Republican surged forward, pointing a trembling finger across the chamber. "She's dishonored this body. She should be thrown out." But even before the echo faded, the Democrats rose as one. They stood shoulder to shoulder, their voices fierce, their applause thundering louder, refusing to let the call for removal drown her. "She told the truth," one shouted. "The truth belongs here," another cried. The chamber split, 2 halves colliding like tectonic plates, the marble hall groaning under the weight of fury and fire. The press gallery shook with urgency, cameras flashing, reporters yelling into their phones, news anchors breaking into live coverage. Congress is in chaos, half demanding her removal, half defending her honor. This is unprecedented. Trump pounded his fist against the podium, his voice hoarse, almost breaking. "Silence her! She's a disgrace!" he screamed, his tie askew, his body shaking. But the chamber no longer obeyed his roar. Because the war had moved beyond these walls. Outside, the people had already chosen their side. Across America, phones buzzed with alerts, screens lit up with hashtags that grew louder by the second. A Jasmine for Justice surged to the top of every platform, drowning out Trump's denials, eclipsing his insults, becoming the chant of a nation. Clips of Jasmine's defiant stand spread like wildfire. Her fiery glare, her unshaken stance, her voice slicing through marble with 4 words that now echoed coast to coast. In small towns and big cities, in diners and classrooms, in living rooms and subway stations, Americans leaned in, watching history unfold live. And when they spoke, it wasn't his name they repeated, it was hers. "Quit your bullshit!" The chamber thunder grew, both sides battling with voices and fists against desks. Democrats encircled Jasmine like a wall of steel, their chants rising above the storm. Republicans shrieked for rules, for order, for her voice to be silenced. But Jasmine stood still, calm in the tempest she had unleashed, her fire radiating, her silence more powerful than their screams. The cameras loved her. Every frame captured the story. Trump's loyalists frothing with rage, Democrats rising in unity, and Jasmine Crockett in the center, the eye of the storm, unbroken, unbowed. The speaker hammered again, voice hoarse from yelling, "Order! Order!" But order was gone. This was no longer a debate. This was battle, and the world was watching. News banners flashed. Congress explodes after Crockett's outburst. Democrats defend. Republicans demand expulsion. Jasmine for Justice takes over social media. Commentators struggled to keep up. "We've never seen anything like this. The chamber is completely divided. But outside, it's not divided at all. Public sentiment is overwhelmingly rallying to her side." Trump's face twisted in fury, but also in fear. His supporters screamed, but their cries were drowned out by the avalanche outside. The chamber, the cameras, the country, it all shifted before his eyes. And Jasmine, she did not raise her voice again. She did not need to. Her silence burned louder than his rage. Her presence eclipsed his desperation. Her steadiness broke him in ways no insult could. Because the chamber was no longer fighting over whether she should speak. They were fighting because she had spoken the truth. And truth was something that could never be unsaid. The chants swelled again. The hashtags spread like wildfire. The people outside roared louder than the gavel, louder than Trump, louder than the chamber itself. They chanted her name. They carried her words. They made her defiance the anthem of a fractured nation. And Donald Trump, gripping the podium, red-faced and trembling, realized the nightmare that had just begun. The chamber was divided, but the country was not. The country had chosen. And Donald Trump knew it. His chest heaved, his grip on the podium white-knuckled, his face drained of the authority he once carried like armor. Panic flickered in his eyes, visible to every lens broadcasting his unraveling to millions. Then he played his last card. He snapped his fingers, and from the shadows of the chamber, his lawyers surged forward. Sleek suits, heavy briefcases, eyes sharp with desperation. Their arrival was sudden, choreographed, a theatrical display of power meant to remind everyone who still held the title of president. One lawyer slammed a stack of motions on the desk, voice rising above the noise. "This proceeding must be suspended. The president will not be subjected to this witch hunt charade. This is unlawful. This is an attack on executive authority." Another lawyer leaned toward the speaker, his voice sharp, threatening. "If this is not halted immediately, the president will invoke Article 2 powers. He will shut this entire spectacle down." Gasps rippled across the chamber. The words hung heavy, "Shut it down." The weight of presidential power, a weapon forged not in argument, but in fear. Trump seized the moment, straightening his back, his voice bellowing again with a desperate force. "I am the president. I will not be humiliated by lies and slander. This hearing is over. I command it." He slammed his palm against the desk, his voice echoing off the marble like a cannon blast. His allies roared in agreement, pounding desks, shouting, "End it! End it now!" But then, silence. Not from his supporters, not from the chamber, from Jasmine Crockett. She rose slowly, deliberately, every movement measured like the tightening of a bowstring. Her eyes never left him, not for a second. And when she reached the microphone, her voice cut through the chamber with icy clarity. "No power can silence the truth." The room froze. Every sound, every chant, every breath seemed to vanish at once. The gavel stilled. The lawyers stiffened. Even Trump himself staggered back as though struck, his mouth open, but no sound escaping. Her words echoed against the walls, lingered in the rafters, carved themselves into the silence. No power can silence the truth. It was not a shout. It was not rage. It was colder, sharper, undeniable. It was the kind of sentence that burrowed deep, that history repeated long after voices faded. The camera zoomed in, Trump's trembling hand gripping the edge of the podium, his chest rising in shallow bursts, sweat glistening on his brow. The lawyers shuffled, their confidence cracking, their motions suddenly flimsy in the shadow of her words. And then the applause began, slow, hesitant, one clap, then another, then a wave. It spread through the chamber like fire catching dry grass. First her allies, then the independents, then even some who had wavered until now. The sound grew, swelling into thunder, shaking the marble beneath their feet. The press gallery erupted, reporters shouting into cameras. She said it. Crockett has just declared, no power can silence the truth, and the chamber is with her. Trump pounded the desk again, but his voice cracked with desperation. Order! This is outrageous! She has no right! No right! But his words were swallowed whole by the roar, because everyone watching knew what had just happened. His lawyers, his threats, his presidential power, all of it had collapsed in the face of one unshakable truth. He could command the government, but he could not command reality. And Jasmine Crockett had just reminded the nation. The hashtags multiplied outside, glowing like embers across the digital sky. Chuck no power silences, truth, Church Crockett rises, justice over fear. Commentators broke in, voices trembling with awe. This is no longer about politics, this is about survival. Truth against a man who believes power makes him untouchable. And tonight, we're seeing power lose. Inside the chamber, Trump's face twisted, his jaw locked, his chest heaving with the effort of rage. But the room had turned against him. Not entirely. His loyalists still shouted. His lawyers still waved their papers. But their voices were brittle now, hollow, drowned beneath the chant swelling outside. Truth! 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 It thundered from the streets, echoed from the chamber, rolled across the nation like a drumbeat that no decree could silence. And in that moment, Donald Trump stood alone, draped in the title of president, but stripped of the authority that once bent nations. Because Jasmine Crockett had taken it from him, not with armies, not with laws, but with words. No power can silence the truth. And the chamber, no, the nation believed her. But the truth had not yet finished speaking. The double doors at the back of the chamber creaked open. Every head turned. Cameras swiveled. Reporters froze mid-sentence. And then he appeared. A man once seated at Trump's right hand, once trusted with secrets meant never to escape the gilded walls of power. His hair silvered, his face etched with years of loyalty and regret. And in his trembling hands, an envelope, thick, sealed, heavy with history. The chamber inhaled as one. He walked slowly, every footstep echoing across marble, the sound impossibly loud in the silence Jasmine's words had carved. Trump's eyes widened, his body stiffened, his lips curling into a grimace of disbelief. No, not him, Trump muttered, his voice cracking into a whisper the microphone still caught. The man reached the center, pausing, looking straight at Trump before lowering his gaze to the speaker. His voice was tired but unshakable. I can no longer remain silent. He lifted the envelope, unsealing it with trembling hands. The papers inside spilled onto the desk, and on the very top, Trump's unmistakable signature, sprawled in black ink, binding him to deals, deceptions, cover-ups he had sworn never existed. Gasps ricocheted across the chamber. Reporters leapt from their seats, shouting over one another, "We have it! Signed by Trump himself!" Microphones shook as voices cracked with shock. "This is the bombshell!" Trump lunged forward, his face ashen, sweat streaking down his temples. "Fake! Fake! Fraud!" he screamed, his voice shrill, echoing against the stone. His lawyers scrambled, flipping through binders, their eyes frantic. But the evidence glared back at them with cold ink and harder truth. The witness stood tall, his hands no longer trembling. "These are not lies. These are not rumors. These are your words, your commands, your signature. For years I protected you. Today I break that silence." He turned, not to Trump, but to Jasmine, and he nodded. It was the passing of a torch. The chamber erupted, but not in chaos, in clarity. Lawmakers rose to their feet, their voices shaking the walls with cries of disbelief and rage. The speaker's gavel pounded helplessly, unable to contain the tidal wave of reaction. Cameras zoomed in on the documents, every line, every letter flashing onto the LED screens above, broadcast live to millions. Americans watching from their homes leaned forward, hands over mouths, realizing they were witnessing the collapse of an empire in real time. Jasmine stepped closer, her eyes locked on the papers, then on Trump. "Is this your signature?" she asked, her voice deliberate, sharp as a blade. Trump froze, his jaw slack. His lips twitched, but no words came. The cameras closed in on his face, every wrinkle, every bead of sweat captured in high definition. And then, silence. The kind of silence that crushed, that suffocated, that spoke louder than denial ever could. The witness placed the final paper on the desk. His voice broke, but he forced the words through. "The truth is no longer yours to bury." The chamber shook with uproar. Reporters screamed into microphones. "This is unprecedented. A former insider has just delivered documents with Trump's own signature." Anchors on live feeds gasped audibly, voices trembling. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are watching history break open." Trump staggered backward, his hands trembling, his face a mask of disbelief. He slammed his palm against the podium again and again, each strike weaker than the last. "Lies! Treason! You're all against me!" But his voice was drowned, swallowed by the tidal wave of evidence, by the gasps of lawmakers, by the chants outside growing louder with every passing second. "Justice! Justice! Justice!" The words bled into the chamber from the streets, a chant now unstoppable, rolling like thunder across the nation. Jasmine turned once more to the cameras, her fire steady, her voice calm. "You can shout, you can rage, but you cannot erase your own hand." Her words struck like steel, undeniable, final. The witness stepped back, his duty fulfilled, his silence broken. The papers remained on the desk, cold, unflinching proof, etched in Trump's own ink. The chamber knew it. The nation knew it. And Donald Trump, red-faced, trembling, undone, knew it most of all. The bombshell had landed, and his empire had no shield left. The cameras did not blink. They zoomed closer, tighter, mercilessly. Donald Trump's face filled every screen in America, sweat pouring down his temples, eyes darting wildly, his jaw clenched so hard his lips quivered. The strongman image he had cultivated for decades was crumbling in high definition, broadcast to millions with nowhere to hide. The man once hailed as untouchable, the self-proclaimed conqueror who boasted of power without limits, now looked cornered, stripped, and afraid. And the nation watched him fall apart. Every bead of sweat was replayed, slowed down, dissected. His hand trembling on the podium, his breathing shallow, his gaze frantic. It was all captured, immortalized, replayed on split screens across every news channel. For years, Trump had lived on spectacle. He had thrived on the roar of crowds, the theater of dominance, the illusion of invincibility. But tonight, that same spectacle betrayed him, because America wasn't watching a titan. It was watching a collapse. Commentators on live feeds stammered as they tried to put history into words. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is extraordinary. The former image of strength is evaporating before our eyes. He's unraveling." Across the chamber, silence spread among his allies. Men and women who once stood at his side, who once echoed his words with fervor, now avoided his gaze. Their eyes fell to their desks, their hands folded tightly, their faces pale. The loyalty that once seemed unbreakable cracked under the unbearable weight of exposure. The betrayal wasn't spoken aloud. It didn't need to be. Averted eyes said it all. Trump's empire wasn't crumbling from outside attacks. It was dissolving from within, abandoned in real time by those who once called him leader. And Jasmine Crockett stood at the center of it all, her presence steady, her silence louder than any speech. She didn't need to gloat. She didn't need to mock. She simply stood, and in her stillness, his collapse became undeniable. The witness's documents glared from the desk, Trump's signature bleeding across every page like a confession he could never erase. And the cameras kept cutting back, to the ink, to his face, to the silent row of allies refusing to defend him. For the first time, the strong man had no army, and America could feel it. Outside, the streets roared with chants. Truth! 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 The crowd had swelled into tens of thousands, their voices shaking the night sky. Screens lit up with hashtags, now multiplying by the second. Legacy in ruins, minor Trump exposed, our justice is now. In living rooms, bars, and union halls, people leaned in to watch the unthinkable. Trump not as a figure of power, but as a man undone. One commentator whispered into the broadcast, his voice hushed, reverent, almost mournful. What we're seeing here is the end of an era. A legacy once built on fear and dominance is collapsing in front of our eyes. This is no longer a hearing. This is history. Trump slammed his fist on the podium again, but the sound was hollow. His voice cracked, breaking under the strain as he screamed, "This is a lie! I am still in charge!" But his words didn't carry anymore. The microphones picked them up, but they fell into silence. Silence not of malfunction, but of rejection. The chamber wasn't listening. The country wasn't listening. Even his allies weren't listening, because his voice no longer commanded the room. It was Jasmine's silence that owned it. She turned her gaze, slow and deliberate, locking on Trump one final time. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her look alone carried the weight of judgment, of history, of justice. And in that silence, he broke. His shoulders slumped, his grip loosened on the podium, his eyes clouded with something America had never seen in him before. Defeat. For decades, Donald Trump had crafted his legacy as a monument to himself, unshakable, unbreakable, eternal. But monuments crumble, and tonight, under the relentless weight of truth, his did. The legacy was no longer a fortress, it was rubble. The cameras broadcast the rubble live, burned it into the memory of millions, etched it into history books, yet unwritten. And in the chamber, as Trump sat hunched and broken, Jasmine Crockett stood like stone, calm, resolute, unbowed. The torch of power had shifted, and everyone watching knew it. The chamber was silent, waiting, every breath suspended in the air like the pause before thunder. Then Jasmine Crockett rose, her presence commanding without effort, her eyes fixed not on Trump, but on the nation beyond the cameras. Her voice rang out, steady, unshakable, each word carrying the weight of centuries of struggle and the promise of a new dawn. Justice never bows to power. The words hit like a lightning strike. For a heartbeat, silence held, stunned, reverent, almost sacred. Then the chamber erupted. Applause burst like a storm, echoing against the marble walls, shaking the rafters, rolling in waves across the room. Lawmakers stood, clapping, shouting, their faces alight with awe. The press gallery roared, their voices tumbling over each other into microphones. Crockett has declared it. Justice never bows to power, and the chamber is on its feet. Even those who had once stood firmly in Trump's shadow rose, not for him, but for her. And Donald Trump did not rise. His head sank lower, his hands limp against the desk. His shoulders slumped under the unbearable weight of a nation's gaze. The man who once towered over every room now looked small, diminished, swallowed by the very truth he tried to crush. The cameras captured it all, the contrast sharp, unforgettable. Jasmine standing tall, radiant, unflinching. Trump hunched, defeated, a silhouette of ruin. It was more than politics. It was symbolism carved in real time. The chant began softly like a murmur, then grew, sweeping through the chamber and spilling out into the streets beyond. Justice! 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 Tens of thousands outside picked it up, their voices rising as one, reverberating through the city, across the airwaves, into the homes of millions watching. The sound was unstoppable, a hymn of defiance, a declaration of a new era. Jasmine turned, her steps measured, deliberate. She gathered the sealed dossier from the desk, pressed it against her chest, and with her head held high, she began to walk. Each step carried history. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing, microphones reaching, but the roar of applause drowned every question. The speaker pounded the gavel in vain, unable to contain the tidal wave of emotion. Lawmakers reached toward her, some clasping her hand, others bowing their heads as she passed, and then she reached the chamber doors. She paused just for a moment, turning her head to cast one last look back. Her gaze swept across the room, the allies who had risen for her, the enemies who had tried to silence her, the man who once wielded power like a weapon and now sat broken beneath its collapse. She did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply whispered, too soft for microphones but loud enough for history. "This is only the beginning." The doors opened, and Jasmine Crockett stepped into the roar of the crowd. The streets exploded. Cheers rained down. Flags waved. Chants thundered. As Jasmine for Justice blazed across screens, trending at the speed of fire, uniting voices from coast to coast. She raised a single hand, acknowledging the people, not as their savior, but as their mirror, because she knew the truth wasn't hers alone to carry. It belonged to them. Behind her, inside the chamber, Donald Trump sat frozen. Cameras still lingered, but his image no longer inspired fear, no longer demanded loyalty. His name had become a relic in that instant, a shadow, an echo. Outside, Jasmine moved through the sea of supporters, the chants following her like a tide. "Justice never bows to power." The phrase she had spoken minutes earlier was now their anthem, shouted by thousands, etched onto posters, filling the night with a sound that promised change. She did not wave like a politician. She did not strut like a conqueror. She walked like a warrior who had fought her battle, who knew the war for truth would continue tomorrow and the day after, and as long as it had to. And the cameras, hungry to immortalize the moment, followed her every step, burning the image of her silhouette into history. A woman leaving the chamber, not in silence, but in triumph. The story did not end there. It would ripple through generations, retold in classrooms, debated in newsrooms, whispered in the halls of power. Because on this night, one thing had become undeniable. Justice was not fragile. Justice was not weak. Justice was fire, and Jasmine Crockett had become its flame. In the end, the battle between Jasmine Crockett and Donald Trump was never just about politics. It was about truth standing unarmed before power and refusing to bow. It showed the world that legacies built on fear and lies can shatter in an instant, while courage, even from a single voice, can ignite a movement. And perhaps the lesson is this: justice is not handed down from the mighty. It is carried forward by those who dare to speak, to resist, and to believe that no lie is stronger than the light of truth. If this clash lit a fire in you, don't scroll, hold it, share it, speak it, like, comment, and send it to someone who still believes justice deserves a voice. Subscribe to Harrison Stories, where silence is broken and truth takes the floor. Hit the bell, because the next chapter isn't quiet. It's raw, and it just might change how you see power. This story is a fictional dramatization inspired by real struggles against injustice and the courage to resist. Any resemblance to actual people or events is coincidental or symbolic for public reflection and critique. Thanks for watching. Justice never bows to power. This is Harrison Stories.